You wanted to know what the Matrix is, Neo? Trinity? Try to relax. This will feel a little weird.
Warning. The subject of this film you are about to watch reveals a crucial secret of your life. You should watch it very attentively, for it concerns a subject that is liable to make fundamental changes in your outlook on the material world. The content of this film is not just a different approach or a philosophical thought. It is a fact which is also proven by science today. Man is conditioned right from the beginning of his life that the world he lives in has an absolute material reality. So he grows up under the effect of this conditioning and builds his entire life on this viewpoint. The findings of modern science, however, have revealed a completely different and significant reality than what is presumed. All the information that we have about the external world is conveyed to us by our five senses. The world we know of consists of what our eyes see, our ears hear, our noses smell, our tongues taste, and our hands feel. Man is dependent on only those five senses since birth. That is why he knows the external world only the way it is presented by these senses. Yet, scientific research carried out on our senses has revealed very different facts about what we call external world. And these facts have brought to light a very important secret about matter, which makes up the external world. Contemporary thinker Frederick Vester explains the point that science has reached on this subject. Statements of some scientists posing that man is an image, everything experienced is temporary and deceptive, and this universe is a shadow, seems to be proven by science in our day. In order to better grasp this secret behind matter, let us be reminded of our information about our sense of sight, which provides us with the most extensive information about the external world. The act of seeing is realized progressively. At the instance of seeing, light clusters called photons travel from the object to the eye and pass through the eye lens, where they are refracted and focus on the retina at the back of the eye. Here, rays are turned into electrical signals and then transmitted by neurons to the center of vision at the back of the brain. The act of seeing actually takes place in this center in the brain. All the images we view in our lives and all the events we experience are actually experienced in this tiny and dark place. Both the film you are now watching and the boundless landscape you see when you gaze at the horizon actually fit into this place of a few cubic centimeters. Now, let us reconsider this information more carefully. When we say we see, we actually see the effect the rays reaching our eyes form in our brain by being converted into electric signals. When we say we see, we actually observe the electrical signals in our brain. By the way, there is another point that has to be kept in mind. The brain is sealed to light, and its interior is absolutely dark. Therefore, it is never possible for the brain to contact with light itself. We can explain this interesting situation with an example. Let us suppose that in front of us there is a burning candle, and we view its light. During this period, when we view the candle's light, the inside of our skull and our brain are in absolute darkness. The light of the candle never illuminates our brain and our center of vision. However, we watch a colorful and bright world inside our dark brain. The same situation applies to all our other senses. Sound, touch, taste, and smell are all perceived in the brain as electrical signals. Therefore, our brains throughout our lives do not confront the original of the matter existing outside us, but rather an electrical copy of it formed inside our brain. It is at this point that we are misled by assuming these copies are instances of real matter outside us. These physical facts make us come to an indisputable conclusion. Everything we see, touch, hear, and perceive is matter. The world, or the universe, is only electrical signals in our brain. For instance, we see a bird in the external world. In reality, this bird is not in the external world, but in our brain. The light particles reflecting from the bird reach our eye, and there they are converted into electrical signals. These signals are transmitted by neurons to the center of vision in the brain. The bird we see is in fact the electric signals in our brain. If the sight nerves traveling to the brain were disconnected, the image of the bird would suddenly disappear. In the same manner, the bird sounds we hear are also in our brain. If the nerve traveling from the ear to the brain was disconnected, there would be no sound left. Put simply, the bird, the shape of which we see, and the sound of which we hear, is nothing but the brain's interpretation of electrical signals. Another point to be considered here is the sense of distance. For example, the distance between you and this screen is nothing but a feeling of space formed in your brain. Also, objects that seem to be very distant in one person's view are actually images clustered at one spot in the brain. For instance, someone who watches the stars in the sky assumes that they are millions of light years away from him. Yet the stars are right inside himself and the center of vision of his brain. While you watch this film, you are in truth not inside the room you assume yourself to be in. On the contrary, the room is inside you. Your seeing your body makes you think that you are inside of it. However, you must remember that your body too is an image formed inside your brain. So far, we have been speaking repeatedly of an external world and a world of perceptions formed in our brain, the latter of which is what we see. However, since we can never actually reach the external world, how can we be sure that such a world really exists? Definitely we cannot. The only reality we cope with is the world of perceptions we live within our minds.
I know of no one who has ever made this claim before, but I rather suspect that my experience is not unique. What perhaps is unique is the fact that I'm willing to talk about it. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So you're saying, are you saying your attempt to understand the fundamental operations of nature leads you to a set of equations that are indistinguishable from the equations that drive search engines and browsers on our computers?
That is correct. So,
Wait, I have to just be silent for a minute here. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos?
into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code, you're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
You live in a program. You've lived in it your whole life, as have your parents and their parents. You were born into an invisible prison. The world as you know it is that program, and it exists everywhere you look. It is so big and so omnipresent it becomes invisible, and it escapes your perception. Even when you occasionally see it, you convince yourself it is not true. It looks at you in the mirror, it takes over your thoughts, and it hijacks your emotions. This program is a Trojan horse, a wireless malware you carry with you everywhere you go. It keeps you hostage, both physically and spiritually here, and some are so embedded in the program that they are one with it. They are the program. It is complicated, but it is real. The physical aspects of our life are mixed with the supernatural, and this is what makes the program so hard to comprehend. Consciously rejecting the understanding of its existence at this stage of human awareness is extremely ignorant and foolish. Yet almost everyone still does it with every waking hour of their lives. If you don't know about the program, it's time you learned about its existence. It is slowly starting to fall apart, and it becomes more visible.
Guys, right here. Looks far away, but it really isn't. See that little tail on that? And look as we get close in on it. It's like, this is 83 times zoom, or they're close to it. You saw that little tail, right? Into the cloud. It's gone. It's not coming out now. See that, right? No plane coming through. Nothing over my head. Oh, there it is. It just appeared. Right there. Let me get in on it here. Appears to be super high, but it's not. It's one of these Emirates faker planes. It's hard to get in on it with the smokiness and the clouds right above me. There you go, right? Faker plane, like this ain't even full zoom, guys. I'll hit digital here in a second. That was digital, I think 1 or 2 digital. You saw how close that was, right? Crazy shit. It's getting too cloudy. Wow, the sun's wicked bright right now through the clouds. And look at it, just a little dot up there, right? You see that, right? Check this out. So I'm on the ground. I'm going to zoom in on this 83 times zoom. And see those birds go across, right? Okay, that's about 83 times zoom right there. Okay? Now check this out. I'm going to come all the way back to the ground. And you see it up there. Now, I'm going to walk over here. You see that crazy sky right now, right? Just want to capture that for a minute before I do this. Now I'm going to turn my attention to a stop sign 1,000 feet away. I've done this before. And we're going to go 83 times zoom. And guys, right there is full 83 times zoom plus 4 times digital. And there's 83 times zoom. So I was able to get closer to the sun than this stop sign. Okay, pull it back. You see that it's 1,000 feet away. Turn around to the sun. And let's go in on the sun. .83 times zoom. And 4 times digital. Gets too close.
Chances are we're all living in a simulation. There's evidence we're living in a simulation. Physics, AI, are we living in a computer simulation? We are in a video game. Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Is reality a simulation? Science fiction is filled with stories about a computer simulation that is so realistic that the people living inside it have no idea that their lives are being simulated. You can tell when Charlie Brooker's run out of ideas when a Black Mirror episode ends with the shock revelation that everything was happening in a computer program all along. But many scientists think that this scenario is highly likely. If you think about how fast computer technology has advanced in the past 30 or 40 years, it seems like creating a simulation that's indistinguishable from reality is not such a far-fetched prospect. Philosopher Nick Bostrom theorizes that a sufficiently advanced civilization would run computer simulations of its evolutionary history. If this were true, they would probably run billions of such simulations, trying to gather as much data as possible. And this means that the chances that we are not in one of these simulations right now is a 1,000,000,000 likelihood. Statistically, unless humanity wipes itself out before it reaches that technological level, it's much more likely than not that we are all part of a computer program. There may even be some scientific evidence for this. A physicist named James Gates claims to have found error-correcting code very similar to a computer program embedded in his equations on particle supersymmetry. It seems that the universe has a program built into itself to correct any errors. The problem with proving the simulation theory is that a computer program would probably contain a failsafe to stop itself being discovered. If a scientist devised a way of proving that reality was an illusion, then the simulation could simply show him different results. The only real proof we get is when the program malfunctions.
one, both these guys have the exact same name. On top of that, they both play professional baseball. On top of that, they are both left-handed pitchers. They both have had the same surgery from the same doctor, and they even dress.
There are many eyewitness accounts of people experiencing these reality glitches. Most of it is unprovable hearsay or can be explained in some other way, but there are others that are more compelling. One example of these reality glitches is the Mandela effect. When a large group of people remember an event happening, but it turns out never to have happened.
I thought an interesting comment was made when somebody said to me, I heard somebody say, where's Mandela? Well, Mandela's dead.
I'm pretty sure every YouTuber in the universe has talked about the Mandela effect at some point, so I don't need to go too deep into it, but there are a few possible explanations for the Mandela effect. Memory is a strange thing, and false memories are possible. But when hundreds of people have the same false memory, it becomes harder to explain. Not impossible though. I'm sure most of you remember this scene from The Jungle Book, where Baloo is dancing around in a grass skirt and a coconut shell bra. Well, what if I told you he never did wear a coconut bra, yet many people remember it very clearly? Most likely people are misremembering the coconut mask he wears in this scene and mixing it up with a coconut bra from some other film. This may go some way to explain why lots of people can misremember the same event. In fact, you might not even have remembered the bra at all, but I just implanted that memory into your mind by telling you to picture it. The one that gets me is the Fruit of the Loom logo. This is how I remember their logo to look, but apparently this cornucopia horn was never in the image. You can go back through the archives of Fruit of the Loom's logo changes, and not once does that cornucopia appear. Yet hundreds of people, including myself, remember it very clearly, and there's various news articles referencing the cornucopia. So what happened? I can't think of any other image that might have implanted a false memory of the logo in my head. Many people cite the album art on the Frank West Fruit of the Loom album as a source of the false memory, but I'm sure I've never seen that album before in my life. And the artist who drew that album cover says himself that he based it on the Fruit of the Loom logo because he preferred it before they removed the cornucopia. So if we're not just misremembering it, what other explanations are there? Perhaps there was a counterfeit brand with a slightly altered logo? Perhaps Fruit of the Loom really did use the cornucopia in their logo for a while, and almost all clothing with that image has since disappeared, and the company themselves have forgotten all about it. Perhaps, if you believe the multiverse theory, we all slipped into a different timeline where the logo was just fruit, but some of us retained the memory of the cornucopia universe. The other possibility is that there was a glitch in the simulation. Perhaps the same error-correcting code that James Gates discovered. Maybe at some point Fruit of the Loom changed their logo and removed the horn, and the program accidentally error-corrected it out of history as well. Perhaps it saves on processing power not to have a bunch of different examples of the logo throughout history. It might seem like a small change, but it could be that the program makes millions of such changes to reality every day, and we only notice a small portion of them. Think of it as the universe defragmenting itself. And sometimes the program makes bigger changes. A small change in a logo might go unnoticed by most people, but what about when a whole town fails to render? One strange case is that of Doveland, Wisconsin. Apparently Doveland was a medium-sized thriving town with hundreds of inhabitants, and sometime in the 90s it simply ceased to exist. It's not as if the town vanished one night, leaving a gaping hole where it once stood and hundreds of missing people. An event like that would surely have caused great alarm. In fact, the town subtly erased itself from history, and from most people's memories. Those that did remember Doveland recalled it like a person remembering a forgotten dream, a hazy memory of a town they once visited and had forgotten all about. Apparently some people even had postcards and t-shirts that they bought in Doveland as souvenirs, although I've yet to see any photos of these artifacts online. The only photo I've seen is this one. It was supposedly taken in Doveland, although I can't see anything in the photo to suggest a location, so unless someone manages to identify the restaurant or the people in this picture, then we only have a random internet rumour to go off. I do like how the image is slightly faded though. If you listen to my spooky bedtime stories video, there was a tale in there about a couple who took a photo of an old cottage, but when they tried to find the cottage again a few days later, they found a post office standing in the same place. When they developed the photo, it was weirdly faded along one side, just like this one. Perhaps this is what happens when you have a photograph of something that has glitched itself out of existence. Sometimes a whole country can disappear. The most famous story comes from 1954, when a man arrived in Tokyo's Haneda airport and handed over his passport at customs. He stated that he was from the country of Taured and would be staying for a few days for business. The passport indeed showed that he was from Taured, and there were stamps to show that he had travelled to various countries before. But there was one problem. Taured doesn't exist. The man was taken into custody and questioned by Japanese police. He told them that Taured had existed for thousands of years, and it was a small country located between France and Spain. The investigators assumed he meant Andorra and showed him a map of Europe to see if he could point it out. Upon looking at the map, the man became angry, claiming that there was no such place as Andorra because Taured had existed in the same place for thousands of years. They called the company where he said he had a business meeting to attend the following day, but they said they'd never heard of him. They then called the hotel where the man from Taured had reserved the room, but no records of his reservation could be found. It was as if the man had slipped into a parallel dimension, or perhaps another simulation. Until the authorities could get to the bottom of the mystery, the man was taken to a hotel room where 2 guards were posted outside the door to make sure he didn't escape. His papers and passports were confiscated. During the night, however, the man completely vanished. Not only that, but the papers and passports that they'd confiscated also disappeared. Just like Doveland, it was as if he'd never existed at all. Now, I'm sure certain details of this story have been embellished over the years, but it's hard to find a definitive explanation as to what actually happened to the man from Taured. I've seen a few posts saying that it was debunked, but they don't actually post any links to anyone debunking it. There is this post that a lot of people seem to copy-paste. It seems to explain that Taured was actually a real place. As far as I can tell, a lot of the information in this post is fictional. I can't find any historical records to actually back it up. There is some real historical stuff sprinkled in there to make it seem legit, but as for the existence of Taured, I'm still none the wiser. Googling most of these details seem to only lead back to the same post. People often cite it as if it explains the whole man from Taured affair, but I remain unconvinced. There's other very similar cases from history of people claiming to be from countries that never existed. 100 years before the Man from Taured case, another man was found wandering lost in northeast Germany. He claimed to be from the country of Laxaria in the Sacrian continent, and naturally both of these places appear on no map. He said that he had travelled thousands of miles over vast oceans, and he was looking for his brother who he had lost in a shipwreck. However, he had no recollection of how he had reached land, or how he came to be wandering lost in Germany. I'm not sure what happened to him after this. He was taken in for questioning, but there's no other information. It seems that that part of the story is lost to history. Like the Man from Taured, it remains an enigmatic mystery. The last idea I want to look at is that of the NPC. For those that don't know, an NPC is a character in a video game that isn't being controlled by another human being. It's a character programmed with a simple routine and repetitive dialogue to make the fictional world seem populated. I know it's become a bit of a meme in recent years to call someone an NPC, but could there actually be NPCs wandering among us? The idea does raise some sinister prospects. Is everyone a thinking, feeling consciousness, or are some of us simply following pre-programmed routines in order to provide the illusion of a world inhabited with free-thinking individuals? Obviously, if this is a simulation, then technically we're all NPCs, but some of us might operate on a lower level of consciousness than others. The simulation might not need to program full consciousness into every single person. Think about all the thousands of people who inhabit the world around you. Can you be sure that they're all autonomous human beings? Some of them could just be following a simple repetitive program that gives the illusion of consciousness. There's a few stories of people encountering NPCs, but most of these are just anecdotal. There's a few good videos of people exhibiting NPC-like behaviour, but I think in a lot of these cases, drugs might be the more likely explanation. It's creepy to think that these empty shell characters might be walking among us though. I worked in retail for many years, and NPCs are as good an explanation as any for some of the behaviour that I've seen customers exhibiting. There's some fairly amusing pictures online if you Google glitch in the Matrix or reality glitch. Most of these are just people who look kinda similar or are wearing the same clothes who happen to be in the same place at the same time. Interesting coincidences, but not exactly proof of the Matrix. If reality is proved to be a simulation, then what happens when we do prove it? Maybe the point of the simulation is to test how long it takes us to realise that the world is an illusion, at which point the simulation will be terminated. The economist Robin Hanson says that if we are interested in self-preservation, we should strive to be as interesting and entertaining as possible. It figures that whoever is controlling the program and is running a whole load of other simulations simultaneously would periodically switch off any simulations that weren't interesting enough, or at least send some disasters their way to liven things up.
Welcome to the Time Variance Authority. I'm Miss Minutes, and it's my job to catch you up before you stand trial for your crimes. So settle in.
Now hang on just a minute.
And we'll get you in front of a judge in no time.
Who actually believes this crap?
Sir, I'm gonna use your ticket.
No. Thanks for visiting the TVA. Don't hesitate to let us know how we're doing.
Most of us experience life as a linear progression, yes? Like this. But this is an illusion because every day life presents us with an array of choices. As a result, life should look more like this. And each choice leads to a new path. To go to work, to stay home, and in each choice we take creates a new reality. Do you understand?
Yes, but what does it have to do with déjà vu?
Déjà vu is simply a momentary glimpse to the other side. Almost everyone experiences it. We feel that we've been somewhere before, because actually we have. in another reality. It's another path. The road not taken.
I know what this place is. The timekeepers have built quite the circus. And I see the clowns are playing their parts to perfection.
Big metaphor guy. I love it. Makes you sound super smart.
I am smart.
I know.
Okay.
Okay.
Please sign to verify this is everything you've ever said.
This is absurd.
Sign this too.
We protect the proper flow of time. You picked up the Tesseract breaking reality. I want you to help us fix it.
God, this place looks terrible. Looks like Quahog was vaporized or something. It says that in this universe, Frank Sinatra was never born, and therefore he was unable to use his influence to get Kennedy elected. So Nixon won the 1960 election and totally botched the Cuban Missile Crisis, causing World War III. Wow, so I guess Lee Harvey Oswald never shot Kennedy? No.
The seven serpents are cosmological, dealing with astrology. It's astrological representations of those forces of the cosmos that he represents. He is a universal monarch, a universal king, which he manifests and he shows evidence of. The black man of Asia. the original inhabitants of Asia. He is a human being of flesh and blood. He comes as a teacher, as a manifestation of God. His teachings are called the Dhamma. He is called the Buddha, the intelligent one, the one who has achieved intelligence, or the genie, the conqueror. He comes to explain the laws of the universe. He comes to confirm that there is, in fact, life after death. When the Buddha appears, he appears as a preacher, and he preaches the Dharma, that existence is a continual cycle of death and rebirth, and that each person's position and well-being in life is determined by his or her behavior in their previous lives. For example, good deeds may lead to rebirth as a wise and wealthy person or as a being in heaven, and a person's evil deed could lead to rebirth as a poor and sickly person, or even rebirth in hell. He preaches that you reap what you sow. A Buddha also teaches that it's possible to break out of this cycle and gain a kind of perfect peace and happiness by practicing righteousness. They are manifestations of God. According to their prophecies, they promise to prove and make manifest through a Buddha or a Jina life after death before the end of this century. How can you teach a people to know God if he himself does not know God? If you try teaching a Christian that God is also a human being, or manifests himself in the form of a human being, or makes himself known through a human being, they will say that you're crazy, that you don't believe in God. Meanwhile, they admit that he's a mystery God who is unknown. They teach not to make any likenesses of him, yet they adorn their walls and churches with pictures, images, statues like human beings. They also say he is a spirit that cannot be seen. They cannot see him, yet they believe in him. In order to remove all doubt, the Buddha, the enlightened one, the intelligent one, the genie, the conqueror, decided to make manifest to the world irrefutable evidence. They wanted to prove to a people in the future the manifestation of God, that God manifests himself through human beings, through men. Now, prophecy is irrefutable. A prophecy is a written confirmation of what will happen at a future date. These people, the black people of Asia, predicted or prophesied what they would do 2,500 years into the future. The prophecy states that he would send something from the past and join it with something from the future, something from the material world and join it with something from the spiritual world. The union of both the past and the future worlds, and the spiritual and the material worlds, would be contained in the revelation of a secret mystic diagram called the Mandala of Two Parts. This is a depiction of the future Buddha who would make this manifest at a point before the end of this century. Now, the scriptures of the world have all prophesied that the end of the age, which we are now entering, the age of Aquarius, we shall see the revelation of that which is secret, and the emergence into the light of day of that which has hitherto been concealed and veiled. This, our present age, is that time, the end of the cycle, the beginning of the new age. This book by Ivan Van Sertima raises the question of the African presence in early Asia. How did they get to Asia? This is the future Buddha. How did they get to Asia? They were called the Mons. And the wind and the rain in Asia is called the monsoon. This is the key to how they got to Asia. The monsoon wind in April blows from the southwest, and in October it blows from the northeast. The monsoon wind blows from Africa to Asia, and from Asia back to Africa. The wind from April to October blows from the southwest, and from October to April it blows from the northeast. These two trade routes and routes that of travel is the direction of the Mons, the Africans of Asia. They went from Africa to Asia, and from Asia to Africa, and they were called the Mons. Like the monsoon, Africa was called Hither India, which India, here I am, come hither, come here where I am. And they would get on the ocean and get in the wind. This is where the phrase get in the wind come from your previous life. The Africans of Asia got to Asia by getting in the wind. This is confirmed from the 1st century. The Greeks knew how they got to Asia, the wafting sailors. They call it the divine ship of salvation. The Mons, when they would arrive in Asia and when they would leave Asia. The Japanese badge of nobility is called a Mon. The monsoon, the monastery, Mani, is identified with the black man of Asia. And the largest statues on the planet Earth located in Asia are depictions of the Buddha, the black man, the Jina. His hair confirms who he is. This is the largest statue in China and the largest statue on Earth depicting the black man. The oldest and largest manifestations of God, like this image of the Buddha in Thailand and Southeast Asia, are representations of the black Africans of Asia. There are no other statues or monuments of antiquity that precede them. They manifest themselves on Earth and prove life after death. This from Ceylon or Sri Lanka, showing the Buddha, thousands of years old. They are the largest statues on Earth, representing the black people of Asia, or the black man of Asia, the one who comes back from the dead to prove immortality. They do it all the time in all the countries, and they prophesied that they would do it before the end of this century. This is the largest statue in Sri Lanka, the largest statue in China, the largest statue in India, the largest monolithic statue on Earth, the genie, the one who comes back from the dead, carved in solid rock 70 feet high. The largest monolithic statue on Earth is the black man, and it is not in Africa, but it is in Asia. The Asiatic black man, the manifestation of God who comes back to preach and explain the doctrine of immortality, how to escape the fires of hell. That is his sole purpose. To attack him is to attack the cosmic forces of God. He sits in Western style because he will be born in the West. The people who he will be born among are called the Negas. This is the future Buddha, the one who is to come, prove with irrefutable evidence for those with intelligence that there is no death, that life is eternal. And this evidence of eternal life is put in place by their control after death of the cosmic forces. This is a cave in India showing the one who is to come in the future. All of these statues and monuments are thousands and thousands of years old. The future Buddha, sitting down in Western style. He is known by many names in many religions. To the Christian, he's the Christ. To the Muslims, the Mahdi, the Messiah, the Avatar, Maruk Bull. To the Koreans, the Buddha, the Genie. All different names for the same individual who is to appear now at the end of the age, the beginning of the new cycle. He is also called Maitreya, the future Buddha. In this book, Maitreya, the future Buddha, you can find the prophecy of his return in 2,500 years. This prophecy identifies the time when he is to appear. It states that he will appear in 2,500 years in a tripartite year in the first year of a cycle. He will descend to be reborn, and he will produce a city of silver by transformation. He will change a city which will serve as evidence of who he is. He must produce a city by transformation. The Buddha was born in 560 BC and died in 480 BC. He received enlightenment at the age of 35, which is 525 BC. This prophecy had to have been made between 525 BC and 480 BC. If you project 2,500 years into the future, it'll come between 1975 and the year 2020. 30, 60, and 90 are tripartite years. 1930 and 1960 is gone. The only tripartite year left is 1990. The first year of a cycle is 1991. In 1991, the future Buddha is to appear. 1991. In Angkor in Southeast Asia, we find the city of the future Buddha, hidden from the outside world for thousands of years and discovered by the French in 1858. It was hidden in the jungle by fig trees. Your ancestors refer to this is turning the wheel of the law. And the name of the one who comes back to turn the wheel of the law is called Nigga Jr. or Nigga Juna. He explains the secret teachings of the Africans of Asia. The wheel of the law is the teaching that there is no death, that life is eternal, and his job is to prove that. Many sacred places are named throughout Asia with the name Nagasaki, Nagarjuna Konda. That means the hill of Nagarjuna. When he appears, he'll be living on a hill. He'll be across from an island like Manhattan, living in a tower, which they refer to as a monastery. This is called Nagarjuna Konda, the hill of Nagarjuna, which is across from an island. You see, he's also known as Nigga-Juni. He is the one commissioned to do that work for the Africans of Asia. Now you might be asking yourself, how did he receive all this information? This book here is The Gods of Northern Buddhism, and I'm going to read to you the story of Nigga-Juni or Nigga-Juna. Just follow the yellow as I read. It says he received the treatise on which he expounded and developed the Mahayana school from the serpent gods, the Niggas, and that the Nigga king himself revealed to Nigga-Juna the holy text in the dragon palace under the sea. That's like America. They further claim that Gautama Buddha, the Buddha, had given this treatise called the Prajnaparamita to the Niggas to guard until such a time, it's a specific time now, as the world should become sufficiently enlightened to understand its transcendent wisdom. And that the Niggas, after converting this individual, Nigga-Juni, to Buddhism, handed over to him their precious treasure. Now let's take a look at what the precious treasure is. It's on the bottom line. They said they handed over to him their precious treasure. The precious treasure is the evidence and the proof of life after death. That's the bottom line. They refer to this as their precious treasure because it's the only thing that God wants to hear at this point in time. It's the only thing in the world that they preach. Praying, stomping, testify means nothing. It's the teaching of life after death, and this is God's gift to the Negro. God has decided to give this to the Negro to make the Negro his appointed people, and you see in sacred temple of Borobudur, the only thing that the Buddha images do there is preach this precious treasure, the proof of eternal life. In this 9-floored greatest religious monument on earth, the top 3 floors show the bell, for whom the bell tolls. Now let me tell you what the bell means in all the religions of the earth. The bell is a symbol of the connection between God and man in all religions. As you see here, in every nook and cranny, in all the little windows you see, and this particular pictorial diagram of Borobudur, you see the Buddha in the bell preaching the law. This is a side view, and this is another side view pictorial diagram. Show all the Buddha images preaching the law. This is the precious treasure. This is the only thing they want to hear at the end of the cycle is the law of God. And this is the bell pyramid. In the Buddhist scriptures, the Siddhartha Pandurika, they call it the lotus of the true law. This is the true law of God. It's the only thing that gets you out of hell at this time. There are more than 500 images of the Buddha. This is inside the bell. Inside each bell, the Buddha preaches the law. The symbol of the bell also means that The God is calling you to obedience, to bear witness to the divine law, to bear witness to God. That's what this bell means. The ringing of the bell is saying, hey, get down on your knees and pray. This is the last one. This is the big one. It's the only thing that the gods want to hear at this time. Here we see the Buddha, a symbolism of the Buddha preaching this precious treasure, the proof of eternal life, and the Buddhists from thousands of years ago in all worlds and every universe get up and bear witness. At the end of the cycle, the living and the dead, the souls bear witness to this teaching of this precious treasure, the law. The preaching of this law is the only thing that gets you out of hell. They say it is the fruit of meritorious action, just the remembering, teaching, and explaining it to others so they can understand it. They say that any place that you preach this should be worshipped as a shrine. They say the value of this is incomparable. There's nothing to compare with preaching this law at the end of the cycle. They say that this preaching is of incomparable measure. The mind cannot conceive how much this is worth. You could give $1 billion trillion away to the poor, wouldn't be worth an inch of this law. This is the only way to get out. They say if you receive it, write it down, memorize it, teach it to others so they can understand it, it's incomparable. They call it the Diamond Sutra, the Thunderbolt, the Vajra, the manifestation of God. The Thunderbolt, the Diamond Sutra. It comes to the chosen people of God at the end of the cycle. The Buddha gives this to the niggas to hold until such a time that the world is ready for it. The niggas give this religious teaching to Nigga and Nigga turns it over to the black people of America, the Negro. What does that mean? That means that the black people of America are the ones chosen by God to provide to the world the proof of the resurrection of the dead. But I don't want to confuse the Negro because his brain might lock on this one. But the resurrection of the dead is also the execution of judgment. Only the Christ can execute judgment on his return. Now let the Negro follow me one more time. He has been chosen by God to show to the world the resurrection of the dead. Now Jesus Christ, let's look at the meaning here. The word Jesus means Savior. The word Christ means anointed. So Jesus Christ just means anointed Savior. It's a title for the Messiah. It's a title for one or people commissioned by God for a specific task. This is the image that the Negro has of the anointed Savior. The European on the cross. This is the depiction of the Africans of Asia, showing the crucifixion of the black people of America. The black man and the black woman being crucified. Which one will you choose? The black man and the black woman of America is the true Christ, carved in stone thousands of years before it ever happened. So as a reward for their 400 years plus of torment at the hands of the brutal slave master, the God of the universe awards the Negro, the righteous Negro, with eternal life by providing that evidence of the resurrection of the dead. He promised the Negro eternal life in the paradise of the gods, and this is what the righteous Negro gets. You have to meditate for a while on this one, because God wants the Negro to preach this sermon.
I'd like to invite you to enter the mandala. That is, to enter a room that we have configured here at the Asian Art Museum as a mandala. Now, of course, the first question that's going to come to mind is precisely what is a mandala? Well, this can be approached in several different ways. If you approach it through the language, a mandala, a manda is a palace, and a la is a hidden presence, usually a divinity at the center of that palace. So it's a palace that contains a divinity. In another sense, in a geometric sense, a mandala is a set of nested squares and circles, a journey through which takes you to that divinity at the center of the mandala. But most importantly, the mandala is a meditative environment that is reconstructed not usually architecturally as we've done here, but rather in the mind's eye. The measure for success in mandala meditation is if you can keep a vision of that mandala, a set of nested squares and circles, in mind for 2 straight hours without wavering. The size of the tip of your nose, you've achieved success and entered the mandala. We think that we may be able to use our gallery space to give you, the visitor, an experience of being inside the nested geometries of the mandala without 20 years of meditation practice. So why don't we take a journey through the mandala and see what happens, see if perhaps it changes your perspective in some sort of interesting way. Now, typically speaking, this journey will begin in the eastern sector of the mandala. It's color-coded blue and ruled over by a Buddha named Akshobhya. But this blue Buddha Akshobhya has some very interesting connections to an important event that lies at the very beginning of Buddhist history, and that's what I'd like to tell you about now. So, as with so many journeys, this particular journey begins in the eastern sector of the cosmos, and in particular at a specific point, and an incredibly important point in Buddhist space-time. Now, we can identify this important space and time with a simple hand gesture. Take a look at what the Buddha, this is Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, is doing with his right hand. He's touching the earth in a gesture called in Sanskrit Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, which means quite simply the earth-touching gesture. And what he's doing is he's calling the entire earth to witness to all of his good deeds that he's performed in his past life, such that it will acknowledge his readiness for enlightenment. And that's what's happening right here. The Buddha is just about to reach nirvana or enlightenment. And if you look behind him as well, you will see a peculiarly shaped tree that turns into or becomes over time the Bodhi tree, or the tree of enlightenment, that marks the very center of the Buddhist cosmos. This is important because in future centuries, a magnificent temple will grow up around this site as well, and we will see that temple in just a moment. But before we do, I'd like to introduce you to someone who has a lot to do with Shakyamuni when he touches the earth. This is a Buddha who makes the same sort of gesture, but who has a very different cosmic status within the mandala. Let me show you. If you'll take a look at this image, you'll see that it has some very interesting things in common with the Shakyamuni that we saw just a moment ago. In particular, take a look at this hand gesture right here. This Buddha, too, is touching the earth to call witness to his perfections. But there is something very different and very obviously different between this Buddha and the one over here. For starters, this object is a reproduction. The original is at the Honolulu Museum of Art, and we were unable to borrow it for this exhibition. But this actually turned out to be a wonderful thing for us, because we can use this high-resolution copy to see all kinds of wonderful detail that would otherwise remain invisible. In particular, the key things that separate this Buddha, who's touching the earth, from this Buddha, who's also touching the earth. Take a look at this Buddha's head. What does he have on his head? What about his armlets here and here? This Buddha is wearing jewelry. Very interesting, because if you'll recall the story of the Buddha, he gave up all wealth in search of enlightenment. So what's happening with a Buddha who's wearing jewelry? Well, this indicates that this is a special kind of Buddha, a royal Buddha, one who rules from the center of the cosmos. And we will soon explore several more examples of Buddhas of this type as we move into the southern sector of the mandala. In the southern sector of the mandala, ruled over by Ratnasambhava, the yellow Buddha of the south, we find some portable art objects that are almost magical in their functionality. Take a look at what the Buddha is doing in this particular plaque from Burma, an 11th century plaque. He is touching the earth, the exact same symbolism we saw with Shakyamuni and Akshobhya just a moment ago. Behind him is this wonderful temple at Bodh Gaya that grew up at that site. Interestingly enough, that temple, when looked at from above, has the same structure as a mandala, a center surrounded by 4 directions. If you look at this particular plaque, just a little bit smaller, you can even see the Bodhi tree coming up from the very back of that temple. Images of this type also were used to transport the symbolism of the center and its power all over the maritime nations of Southeast Asia. Now, as we move to the western sector of the mandala, something really interesting comes up. Now, as we mentioned at the very outset of our discussion, we have 3 members of a set of 5 Buddha paintings. Now, as it turns out, we've been able to trace the fourth, the Akshobhya, to Honolulu, the blue Buddha who's touching the earth, but we as yet have been unable to trace the fifth one, the red Buddha Amitabha of the West. So, for purposes of this exhibition, we've had to find a stand-in, but what a stand-in. This is a Japanese Taima mandala which depicts the Pure Land of the West called Sukhavati. It's presided over by Amitabha, who is the Buddha of the West, and he is featured at the very center of this painting. Now, the teachings surrounding the Taima mandala are very, very interesting. The notion is this: if you hear the name Amitabha, the way the language works is if the word simply falls in your ear, you won't ever be born in hell again. Instead, you'll be reborn in the Pure Land of Amitabha, like this little person here on the red and blue lotus. So simply by hearing Amitabha's name, you can be reborn in a lotus, even if you're the worst of sinners. Let's say you are the worst of sinners. His preaching over time will gradually open your lotus, open it, open it, open it, open it, until you too are enlightened. This is a very interesting painting to me for another reason as well. It is also supposed to perform the same function of taking you to Amitabha's Pure Land after death simply by seeing it. So paintings of this type are often called a liberation on sight, a magical painting. And if you stand back from this painting about 7 feet, you'll be able to see how these geometries work. They all converge towards the center of this painting, pulling you into its visual world, just like the text on which it's based pulls you into its narrative world. Now, as we move into the northern sector of the mandala, some very interesting patterns start to emerge. The northern sector of the mandala is overseen by the green Buddha. The green Buddha's name is Amoghasiddhi, whose name means unfailing success. Now, Amoghasiddhi is a very important Buddhist deity, again of the north, but his power is incomplete without his female counterpart. And that's why we have included her in this exhibition as well. If you move over here to my right, you'll be able to see the Buddhist deity Green Tara, who is the female counterpart of Amoghasiddhi. In Buddhist thought, she's called either a mudra, which means a seal, or a prajna, which means a wisdom. When she is in combination with Amoghasiddhi, they release a kind of fusion power that transforms negative emotions into their positive counterparts. Also, this painting is particularly important for its historical significance. This painting comes from a place called Karakoto that was destroyed in 1227 by the Mongols. The Mongols missed one stupa, which is a Buddhist reliquary that paintings are kept in. They missed one. I am not sure that this painting is from that cache, but it may well be, and we may be able to determine this over time. One more very interesting aspect about Green Tara, and about this tapestry in particular, if you'll look at her right leg, you'll see that it looks like she is almost coming out of the painting. And in fact, her purpose is to actively intervene in the lives of her devotees. And this is a graphic representation of that point. So to this point, we've been through the 4 outer quadrants of the mandala. We've been to the east, the south, the west, and the north. And now it's time to cross the barrier and enter the mandala proper. What barriers are we talking about? And barriers between what? Well, if you take a look at the floor diagram that you see right here, you'll see what's happening. You'll see the distinction between the world outside the mandala and the world inside the mandala. The world inside the mandala is very different from the one outside because it's comprised of one thing, and that is mind alone. It's a completely non-objective world, totally different from the one we usually inhabit. And for that reason, insulated from the world we usually inhabit by a variety of barriers for the protection of meditators. So if you look at the outer layer of the mandala, the first insulating layer you see is a set of stylized flames. That's the curlicues you see right here. Moving inwards from that barrier, you see yet another barrier between the ordinary subject-object world and the visionary world of the mandala that appears in the mind's eye. Moving in yet another layer, you'll see a set of stylized lotus leaves. These lotus leaves are the symbol for spontaneous generation, and it's these lotus leaves that indicate something that has appeared by itself in the visionary world. And that's exactly what our Buddhas sit on, as well as something else very special at the center of this gallery that I'll show you in a moment. So we've gone through all the sectors of the mandala. We've gone through Akshobhya's blue sector, the yellow southern sector, the red western sector, and the green northern sector. So now we've finally arrived at the center, and we can understand that we've arrived there because of a very special shape. Please take a look at this stupa, which is a Buddhist monumental reliquary, and you'll notice a series of stepped platforms that first go in and then come back out. This is Mount Meru, the Olympus of ancient India and of the Buddhist cosmos, and wherever you find it, it marks the center of the cosmos. You'll also see another super interesting object here, one that we noticed just a moment ago. Do you see this hemispherical dome? That hemispherical dome is sitting on top of a double layer of lotus leaves, the very ones that we saw a moment ago in the diagram on the ground. This is the symbol of self-generation. On top of those lotus leaves, you'll also find a series of 4 shrines, and in each of those shrines, you'll find a Buddha as well. In this particular shrine, which is the Shrine of the East, you will find a Buddha of the East, Akshobhya, touching the earth, just as he does in the eastern sector of the mandala on the wall. And this same pattern holds true for each of the others. But what's going on there in the center? There's a 5th Buddha here. You just can't see him, but he can see you. Take a look at the very center of that square object. It's called a harmika, right on top of the dome, and you will see 2 eyes looking out. These are the eyes of the Buddha of the center. His name is Vairochana, the Sun Buddha. And one of the great things about this exhibition is that we have 2 of the world's most important representations of Vairochana from Tibet in painted form, and I'd love to show those to you now. Who you're seeing right here is Vairochana, the unseen seer at the center of the stupa, in one of the Asian Art Museum's most historically important paintings. In this particular painting, you can see the cosmic Buddha Vairochana of the center looking directly out at you, the viewer. In addition, you can see a lot of his companions looking at him. Some of his other companions are looking at each other. And even one blue companion up here in the upper left-hand corner is looking at you. This is a whole network of seeing into which not just the images on the painting, but the viewer as well is involved. And this is a typical, very powerful mode of religious interaction that you'll find throughout South Asian religious traditions. And now we come to arguably the most interesting and important object in this small exhibition. Who you see in this painting is also the Buddha of the center, the cosmic Buddha Vairochana, the radiant one, the Sun Buddha. But as you can tell, there are some fairly dramatic differences between this representation of Vairochana and the one that we saw just a moment ago. For example, all of the figures in this painting are standing very stiffly and looking straight out at you, as opposed to the kind of interactivity that we saw in the Indian painting just a moment ago. So it's much more hieratic, much more shrine-like, but there are also some other very interesting things going on in this painting. So at first glance, when you look at this particular painting, it may look like the cosmic Buddha Vairochana is simply within the midst of a field of a whole bunch of random Buddhas. But it doesn't take many hours of examination and analysis to begin to find some very interesting and important patterns. Let's take the blue Buddha Akshobhya, because there is one of him here, and see if maybe we can spot some of these patterns. There's a good example right up there. See if you can spot any blue Buddha Akshobhyas around him. If you look for a few minutes, you may be able to determine that those blue Buddha Akshobhyas are all arranged in a diagonal line, which made us think when we first saw it, perhaps the other Buddhas are arranged in the same way, and as it turns out, they are. Each one of the 5 differently colored Buddhas is arranged in a diagonal line, and when taken together, they make a pointed shape over Vairochana. Interestingly enough, it is precisely this pointed shape, it's called a Kutagara, that Vairochana delivers his teachings inside of. So we have a very interesting intersection between text on the one hand and image on the other. To return to the center of the mandala, some very interesting insights become available to us. If you'll recall at the start of our discussion, we were talking about what it might be like to be inside of the nested geometries of the mandala, inside of the squares and the circles and the squares and the circles that comprise the form of the mandala. So one of the things we wanted to do was to give our visitors an experience of that without having to go through the traditional 20-year meditative regime. And so what you're looking at right here is a way of visually getting at that experience of being inside the nested geometries of the mandala. Let's review where we are. We're inside a gallery that's been configured as a mandala. We are at the center of a virtual mandala within that one. Right here, you see yet another mandala, and if you look off in the tunnel back here, you see that that mandala never stops. You are immersed within a forest of mandalas. Interestingly enough, the mandala itself is also an image of consciousness. So one of the lessons one takes away from this visual experience is that one is immersed in a sea of awareness. And this has come not through philosophy, but through vision alone. And if there is one hallmark to the tradition that we're exploring in this exhibition, it's the power of vision alone.
It just started out kind of out of nowhere, and I was having some autoimmune type things like fibromyalgia and rosacea in my cheeks and stuff, but I mean a lot of women have that. And I was home with my daughter one day and drinking just a smoothie in the living room, and I had a history of anaphylaxis to shellfish, but I hadn't had an attack in years and years. I just kind of kept those EpiPens around obligatory, because you're supposed to, but I'd never used one. I'm in the living room and I start having difficulty breathing and swallowing, and I'm a nurse, and I was like, holy cow, this is anaphylaxis. So I gave myself my EpiPen. My son drove me to the hospital, and it was a small town we were in, and I knew the nurse who was checking me in, and I won't say her name, but when she was checking me in, I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. She's got no idea what she's doing. And she said, well, why did you come? You took your EpiPen. What'd you come to the hospital for? And I thought, wow, you don't even know the basic protocol for anaphylaxis. You take your EpiPen, you go to the hospital. So she's like, we're waiting on a bed for one of the rooms, so I'm just going to set you here in the hallway. We'll get to you soon. And that's a person that goes, I'm a critical care nurse. That person goes right to the trauma bay because you may end up having to intubate. So I'm in the hallway. I've got Strider, which is, and people are just walking around doing their thing. I'm dying. Give myself another shot of my EpiPen. And finally the PA looks over and is like, she's not looking so hot. They get me in a room, and at this point we don't have an IV or anything. And I'm crashing fast. Don gets there and they move me into trauma, and they can't get an IV because when you have anaphylaxis, everything kind of clamps down. And so it's just going from bad to worse. And Don's like, if you don't do something, she's going to die. You need to intubate her. They said, oh no, we've got plenty of time. And it was immediately after that I just quit breathing. And it's funny because I popped out of my body so I could see what was going on. And so I'm kind of watching and I'm thinking, man, who is that girl? She's pretty sick. I was so depersonalized. I didn't realize that was me. So they intubated me, and then everything was just black for a while. The next thing I remember, I kind of materialized in the back seat of my sister's car, and she was driving from Wisconsin to Kentucky, and she was at this gas station. She had pulled over and it was pouring rain, and I knew my body felt weird, like not solid, and I couldn't feel my bottom and my legs against the seat, and that seemed odd, and I just couldn't sort out what was going on. So I'm in the back seat of her car and I see her clothes and they don't match, and I'm thinking, what on earth is she wearing? She looks ridiculous. And I sensed something was wrong. Why is she driving in this pouring rain? She should be home. Maybe something's happened with one of the kids. And I saw her pull her phone out. She got onto Facebook and she typed, hang on, or hang in there, kiddo, I'm coming. And then I popped back out of her car and I was just in this dark void. I was in this expanse that was so dark, and it seemed limitless to me as far as its space. And there was an oppressive nature to it. And I wonder if some of that being on the ventilator and the agitation that occurs in a patient, even in a coma from being on a ventilator, I wonder if I was kind of feeling that on that side, because as a nurse, it seems to me what people would describe. And so I had this just oppressive work of breathing, you know, and it was like I knew I didn't need to breathe over there, but it still seemed like I had to perform the work. And I was just stuck there. I couldn't figure out how to get out. And time is really different there. Time here is so structured, and time there really gets away from you. And so I always tell people, if I had to compare this earthly time with the time that I spent in the void, I would say it was probably about 10 years. I began to wonder if I had ever really lived. Like maybe I just imagined all of that to have something to think about in that place. I just didn't know what was going on, why I was trapped there, what I could do to get out. I would try to move and I'd drag myself forward a little bit, and then I'd get so tired and go into what I call the deep sleep, where I had no awareness. And that kind of went back and forth for a long time. And then finally, I started doing some introspection and saying, you know, is there something that I need to understand or learn before I can leave here, or realize, you know, maybe I did live that life and there's something maybe it's me, maybe I'm why I'm stuck here. And it just occurred to me that the spiritual space that I was in was a picture of the spiritual space that I had made on the earth realm. I had kind of, since my divorce many years ago, I had kind of built this wall around myself to protect me and protect the kids. And, you know, a wall's great to protect you, but it also keeps people out and it keeps you in. And so I'd really started to isolate. You know, I mean, I went to work, I took care of my kids, I took care of my house, I went to work, I took care of my kids, I took care of my house, and I stopped putting myself out there. And so the isolation that I had built on this side followed me over. As soon as I figured out that this was the eternity that I had created, as soon as that realization happened, there was this rumbling and it exploded open. And so now all these little pieces of the darkness, like almost shards, are flying. They're just spinning around. And the darkness is pushing further and further away, and this spirit comes. And I didn't know who she was at first, and she's just larger than life. Orange hair on her head that is so bright, it's on fire. And so there's like these little licks of flame that are her hair, and she's just such an attractive spirit. Like I couldn't keep myself from going to her. And so I go to her, and she holds me against her chest, and I realize it's my grandmother. And I'm weeping. You know, I'm so relieved that someone's there and I'm not alone and the dark is gone, and I'm just overcome and I'm crying, and her energy is just circling around me, and mine's still separate, but she's kind of encompassing me. And these shards of the darkness keep trying to get in, and they hit her energy and they're flung further away. And she's holding me and I'm crying, and she says telepathically, because they don't speak, but she says, "Calm yourself, dear one." And the words were like, if any of the people who watch this have ever been given like morphine or fentanyl or whatever, IV for surgery, you know, that immediate rush that you get that's like super relaxing and you can feel everything. That's what it was like. It was like a chemical. I felt it acting on her words. The intention of those words acted on every cell in my body. And I just immediately relaxed and kind of melted into her. And just, I mean, her energy was just amazing. I could feel her loving me. And I asked her, I said, "Am I dead?" And she said, "Oh, no. She said, it's like you learned in science. Energy can't be just created or destroyed. It just changes forms. It's true here too. So you don't die. You either are alive on the earth side or you're super alive on this side. And it's just this transition." And she said, "You are kind of in between. And there's a little cord that's holding you to your living side. And if you wanted to go back to that, you could." And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. You know, she just kind of loved on me for a little while. And I was just floating in this light, and I didn't realize she had gone. And all of a sudden, there was this like rumbling, thundering, and like this presence shook everything that ever had been or ever would be. every planet in the cosmos just was rumbling with this energy, and I could feel it in my bones, and I knew something big was coming. And I never saw a person, and I always refer to God as he, just because the energy felt very masculine to me. But I mean, I can't say with certainty that this was a man, and I don't think God is a man. I think it's, I don't know, he was this mix of masculine and feminine because he was nurturing, but that power makes you think, you know, at least me as a traditional person, it makes me think of a man. You know, he came to me and I heard him say this telepathic thing. He said, I am. And that was it. That's all he had to say. I'm like, man, you're the stuff. You just come up to somebody and say, I am. And you're like, yeah, you are. There's a resonance, and it's the key of D is what it sounded like to me. And it's hard to talk about. It just had this vibration to it that was alive, that just went through me. And it was, I could feel it just coursing through every part of me. And so I'm there with him, and immediately I got kind of scared. I'm like, oh no, I wasn't ready for this. He's going to look at all the stuff that I've done wrong, that I'm so ashamed of. And you know, he wasn't judging me. He was like super loving and everything, but I just, it was like being naked in front of a crowd. I just was wanting to kind of hide, and he kind of soothed me in that. And I knew we were going to go through my life. And so here I'm dreading stuff like a kid, you know, worried about the parents reading their diary or something. And all those things that I was so worried about, that I was dreading, never came up. What the heck, right? I think I had probably beat myself up enough about those. And so these other things came up. And first he showed me the good. And all of the things that I've done that I feel really good about did not come up. And the things that came up were, there was a scene in the grocery store that I had forgotten about. I mean, probably when my kids were little. There was a woman in line in front of me, and she was short just a couple dollars to pay her bill. And she was trying to figure out what to put back. And I just knew what it was like to be in that position as a young mom. And I said, it's okay, I've got it. And I gave her the money. And it immediately, so I'm seeing this scene like I'm there, and immediately it flashes forward, and I see this woman working in a food pantry, and she's blessing these people with food. And God's showing me, he's like, I want you to see the ripple effect of every little act of kindness. And I saw that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then we went through some of the negative things. And the one thing that really stuck with me was that of all the things I've done in my life that I'm not proud of, the thing that was shown to me is probably the hardest thing to never do again. And it was to control my thoughts about other people. And God showed me, he said, let me explain something to you. So a thought has a certain measure of energy to it. And a word has even more, and an action has more than that. But it all starts with a thought. What you think about is what you talk about, is what you end up doing. And so it starts here. You got to control your thoughts and your heart. And so he showed me these negative thoughts that I had about people, and they were deserved. Let me tell you, these were some jerky people. So he showed me that when you have a negative thought about that person, that energy goes out there and it attaches itself to that person, and you contribute to the jerk that person is. Now you've attached more of that energy to them. This is why forgiving is so important. So when you forgive people, people say, oh, it's not for them, it's for you. It is for them, because if they don't receive some measure of forgiveness, that energy is still attached to them and it can't come away. The energy's got to go somewhere. You know, energy isn't created or destroyed. It just changes form. So when you have a thought, so if I think something negative about you, that thought attaches itself to your spirit and it makes you more the person that you are, that I'm thinking you are. And when I forgive you, that energy is able to be redirected. And so that little bit of negative that I put on you that made you more the negative person that you are now comes off because I've forgiven you. And so it's really important to that other person's journey for you to forgive them. And it's really important to you because not only does that negative energy go and attach to them, but it attaches to you. And energy attracts energy. So if you're harboring all of these negative feelings about people, even if they're well-deserved, you're just drawing more of it to you because that energy isn't attached to you. And wow, I mean, that's life-changing information. You know, here I am with this loving creator who's kind of let all the big stuff go that I was really worried about. And then I suddenly become angry with him. And I realized I'd been angry with God for a long time. And I told him, I said, you know, you say you're this loving God and you want the best for your children. And I call bullcrap. You know, and you can just be so honest. I love that. I've seen what you've allowed my own children to go through. And I said, here their dad abandons them when they're just babies. And, you know, him leaving me was hard enough and not deserved. And for him to abandon his own children. And I thought, you know, I can take whatever he did to me, but watching those kids, you know, talk to him on the telephone and then go to the mailbox every day to check for a gift that he said he was going to send that's never coming, and watch them walk back heartbroken every day. What kind of God allows that? You know, I said it would have been easier on all of us, and this is terrible to say, but it would have been easier if he died, because I could have told the kids this story about what a wonderful man he was and how much he loved them, and they would have at least had that. But now they've got this man that's alive that is failing them in every way, and of course children take that on and attribute it to something being wrong with them. And I really had held that against God, and I was bitter, and I wanted to be mad at him. You know, I mean, I was kind of balled up about it. And he said, oh, you've completely misunderstood me. And he said, let me show you something. And we flash forward, and we're sitting in the bleachers. David, my oldest son, is sitting to my right. Now, when I had the experience, my grandson was 2. So David's sitting to my right, and Cole's older. He's like 5 or 6, my grandson is. And we're watching him play soccer. And he's running up and down this field, and the sun's on his hair. And you know that magic of just kids, you know, there's just something about it. And he's running up and down the field, and I just seeing him in his strong body and his, you know, his hair, and he just, I mean, just magic. It's just magic. And David looks at me and he says, Mom, I'm never going to get through this. He says, Mom, I'm going to be the dad to him that I deserved. If it took his dad leaving for him to make that commitment, I get it. You know, it's been worth it. And I got to say, he's been that dad. And it's so funny because a couple years later, Cole's playing soccer. Who would have known that at 2, right? Cole's playing soccer, and David looks at me and he says, Mom, I'm going to be the dad to him that I deserve. I mean, it just sucks the air out of you. I'm like, oh my gosh, that happened. And it was this confirmation from God. You know, you were here. There's times you doubt that near-death experience because so many people doubt it. And he's like, no, you were here, and I'm making manifest the things that I promised you. And I was like, wow. The other thing I learned there was we have this really screwed up definition of good and bad. To us, good is when nothing is wrong and everything is right. And in the spiritual realm, good is forward motion, no matter how awful it feels. So you're moving forward, you're growing, you know, you're affecting the lives of other people, even if you're doing it through grief or, you know, whatever. That's considered good up there. He's like, yep, you're doing good work, even though all the circumstances around it suck. You're still good. It's not bad. You're moving forward. Now, the day that you start sitting in that recliner and you stop interacting with the world and you're just in that, you know, I'm going to do what makes me comfortable, that's bad, even though nothing bad's happening. Not what we're here for. We weren't here to be sedentary creatures that have no effect on the world around us. There's no point in you being here if that's what you're going to do. You know, I learned when I was over there that before we come to this life, there's actually a decision-making process that we go through with some consultation of spirit guides and things like that about what family we want to come to and what general lessons we'd like to learn while we're here. And I think we know the whole story before we come. I think we forget it when we get here. I try to remind people of that because before you came, you knew what traumas you were going to face. And you were like, that's the life I want to live. I want to have those lessons because those are going to contribute to the growth of my spirit and the way it needs to grow. And so this higher you makes decisions here that are terrible, and here they're awful because this life, we perceive it as being really a long time. But I got to tell you, when I pulled out of my body, this seemed like it had been over like that. People say, well, what about kids with cancer that are suffering? Or what about kids that are born horribly deformed? And I just tell them, I'm like, those are the most sacrificial spirits. Those are the ones on the other side that said, I'll come void of even the ability to communicate just so I can show people a love that transcends speech. So, I'm in this light, and this kind of healing process begins where the light comes through my feet and it just starts creeping up through my body. And it's healing every little cell that it comes in contact with spiritually. It goes through my stomach and it goes through my chest, and it's so powerful. I can just feel this energy coming up through me, and it gets to my tongue, and these beautiful songs come out, that I can't stop. God's energy shot out my eyelashes, and it was so bright. And it was like looking at the sun without having any pain or your eyes dilate even, and no heat or anything. And so I tried to close my eyes because I didn't want any of the energy to get out. And so I'm closing my eyes, and it shoots out my eyelashes, and it goes out into the expanse and turns around and comes back. I can feel it going through the little curves in my brain. And then I feel like I get to this more core part of myself, and God's there. And it blew me away. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Do you mean to tell me you've been in there all the time? You're not this external thing? And he's like, well, I'm kind of both. And I'm like, so all of us, even the people that don't believe, God is in there. And he's like, you can't take me out any more than you could take out your own father's DNA. I made you. I'm in there. And you can choose to not acknowledge me. You can choose to walk around saying your dad's not your dad, but we can prove he is. I'm telling you, I'm in there. And I'm just waiting to love you. And, even through all of this crap you're going to go through. And I went through some hell there for a while, and I've had a lot of trauma in my life. And he kind of melted all of that away. And I started realizing I was going to have to make this decision about going back. And there was a point, actually, when I was still in the void, that I was able to progress and move and see myself in my hospital room. And so I see myself lying there in a coma, and I saw my daughter there. I knew what she had worn that day, and was able to describe that back to her. I knew what part of the room she'd stood in. So I get to this point where I'm in the light with God, and I have to come back. And it seemed like a decision that I probably had made before I was born, that I'd known this was going to happen and that I was going to choose to go back because I hadn't lived the life I was supposed to live. Not even close. In fact, I had avoided doing the things I was supposed to do. I can't tell you how heartbroken I was to leave. And Don says to me, my husband's like, well, why would you not want to come back to me? And I'm like, I can't make you understand that. Until you've been there, you just can't understand it. I knew you'd be okay eventually. And so I made that decision to come back, and I was crying. And I told God, I said, at least let me remember it. Because if I can't remember this, I don't think I'll have any hope. And I woke up, I was off the ventilator, my sister was standing there, and the first thing I said was I was with God. And the nurse came in and she called the doctor, and I'm in St. Joseph Catholic Hospital, and the first person they send in to see me is a psychiatrist. You can't see God. And so they wrote that I was having delusions, and and that stuff follows you. And I thought I just couldn't get over the irony of that. It's interesting the response you get when you have a near-death experience, because I think as a believer, as somebody who believed in God beforehand, I just assumed that all of my friends that were religious would be the ones that wanted to hear the story. The people that I have gotten the hardest time from have been the religious folks. And I always try to remind people, because I do understand what their reservation is. I tell about this dark and empty void that I was in, and they're like, well, wait a minute, you're a Christian. You should have gone right over to heaven. And I think I've figured that out. A near-death experience is not a death experience. You know, I think God knows you're only going to be there a short while. He knows you're going to decide to go back because you're not done yet. So I think the near-death experience is tailored to the experiencer with what they need so that they can go back and overcome some things that are hindering them in their life. That's not the same experience you're going to give somebody who's coming to stay. So for all of the folks who are Christians who are like, well, you didn't see Jesus and all these other things, you know, I was just there for a little visit. And those little visits aren't like moving in.
I hope and pray that nobody ever goes through what I went through, because I have never told anyone what really happened and what it was like for me. It was really bad, really, really bad. And I think it was an incredible gift of love that God gave me to do that. My faith was materialism. What I believed, and all of my PhD friends and all of my friends believed, that if you can't measure it, see it, weigh it, count it, it simply doesn't exist. So when I was dying, people asked me if I prayed, and it's like, I'm trying to explain to you, like, the last thing in the world I would have done was pray. I would have sooner jumped off the Eiffel Tower than pray. What an absolutely silly notion. I asked for morphine. I asked for a doctor, because the pain of the hole in my duodenum, which was leaking hydrochloric acid and other delightful digestive juices, I was dissolving myself. I was digesting myself on the inside. And if you want to know what that feels like, get a red hot coal out of a fire and stick it inside your gut. I'd seen 2 doctors in emergency, and they were very nice, but they didn't do anything. They just sent me over to surgery. They told me I had an hour to live. That's what they told me. And that I would be having surgery right away. So they sent me to surgery, and unbeknownst to them, I'm sure there wasn't anybody to do the surgery. So that's why I didn't get any meds. You know, people tell me, well, the reason why you had your near-death experience was because of all the narcotics you'd been given. And like, I begged for anything and I was given nothing for 10 hours. Nothing. What about nothing? Don't you understand? When the nurse came in and said that they were unable to locate a doctor, that's when I told my wife, I said, tell my parents that I love them. And I said goodbye, tell my kids. And she was crying like I'd actually never seen anybody in my life cry like that. I mean, she was crying from the soles of her feet all the way up and just shaking and throbbing. And she sat down and I looked at her and I said, time for me to go. So I checked out, you know, really, really easy. I found it the easiest thing in the world to die. I was having a lot of trouble breathing. For the last several hours, all I was doing was trying to breathe. I had enough sense to know that if you stop breathing, that would be a bad thing. All I had to do was just stop doing that, and I went unconscious. Awoke, I was standing there. I felt absolutely physically more real, more alive, and completely healed than I'd ever done in my life. So the first thing I did was I did a reality check, which consisted of taking my hands, and I felt myself from the top of my head, felt myself all the way down, right down to my feet. And it's like, feeling good. Matter of fact, feeling really good. So then I started to do a sensory check. I know it sounds very rational, but I was a very rational person. I can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights in the ceiling, hear them humming really loudly. And then I looked and I realized that in our, I was an art teacher. So like in our vision, we see 180 degrees if you have 2 eyes. Well, I was seeing way more than 180 degrees. And I'm going, ooh, that's so weird. And then I checked my depth of field, which is, like if you focus on something far, your near is out of focus and vice versa. I was going like, I have complete depth of field. I mean, I am focused on everything. And then I'm like, touch. And like I'd already touched my body and it's like, whoa, like really, very sensitive. And then so I'm doing the bottoms of my feet and like I could read the texture of linoleum through my feet. And I'm going like, wow, this linoleum's like so cool. So I'm looking around the room, and my wife's on the other side of the bed, and then I notice in the bed, mostly covered by a sheet, but the head not completely covered, was a person. And I looked at the person who was facing my wife away from me, and to my horror, it bore a remarkable resemblance to me. Now, I knew rationally that that wasn't me, because I was standing there, and like, you can't, rational people know you can't bifurcate. You know, I mean, that's crazy stuff. That's schizophrenia to say that like you were standing over yourself, looking at yourself, right? Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not nuts. That's not me. So then I'm thinking, how come it looks so much like me? Because could it be a coincidence? No, that's ridiculous. So I'm trying to think of a scenario. So what I came up with, which I realized was absolutely ludicrous, was that the French hospital personnel had made a wax replica of me. I realized, one, they didn't have the time to do that, and that's like takes a lot of skill, because it was a very good replica. And three, like, what would be their motive? You know, I mean, why would they go to all that trouble and expense? Yeah, I mean, looking back was funny. At the time, it was very disturbing. So it made me angry. I'm going towards anger. And then I tried to communicate with my wife, her head down and tears running down her cheeks. And I get no response. And it was like infuriating. One of her techniques to punish me when we were not getting along was to ignore me. So I'm figuring she's really, really mad at me for what I have done to her and ruined her life. And so I turned to my roommate, Monsieur Florent, who was a 68-year-old, super kind, sweet, sick Frenchman. I tried to talk to him. He looked through me like he couldn't see me, which of course he couldn't. I started yelling and screaming at him, and no response. And now I'm really agitated, very, very agitated. Yeah, so I heard people outside the room calling me by name, which I thought was strange because I was in France, and surprisingly, the people in France speak French, and Howard is not a French name. They're speaking English. Howard, you know, come with us. So went over the doorway of the room, and there were people out in the hallway, and the hallway was gray, like a really, really bad black and white TV picture, very fuzzy, which was weird because the room was so ultra clear, and the hallway was very indistinct. And there was these people out there, and they're saying, "Come." And I said, "Are you from the doctor? I'm sick. I'm supposed to have surgery. I've been waiting all day." And they said, "We know all about you. We've been waiting for you. Hurry up and come with us." So after some convincing, I became sure that they were hospital people to take me to surgery. And considering the treatment that I'd had in this hospital up to this point, the fact that they wanted to walk me to surgery made perfect sense. I mean, I never questioned that. And so we went on a long journey. Hell is separation from God, and the only thing that makes hell bad is the people there. God doesn't make hell bad. If they were nicer to each other, it'd be a lot more pleasant down there than it is. In their separation from God, it also means all the good things that God gives us, like there's no birds or butterflies or flowers or sunshine or rain or wind. There's no candy. There's no chocolate cake. There's no ice cream. It's pretty bleak. What psychologists have found when they cage a bunch of animals in a cage for a period of time, they start gnawing on each other, because that's the only gratification they get. In prison movies, there's a concept of the new fish. When a new inmate comes into the prison, like, everybody's excited because they want to initiate them, which usually means brutal rape and other things, right? So I was new fish. So hundreds of them had their way with me. The physical part is awful, but the emotional part is much worse than the physical part. When it was happening and after it happened, it's like, how could they want to hurt me that much? Why do they hate me that much? You know what I mean? That's the part I couldn't. I can't understand, because you know what? I know why now. Because they don't care. They weren't direct to me personally. It was just I was new fish, and when they were done with me, by being done with me, is I was no longer responsive, physically and emotionally, too far gone. You know, the term that I like to describe was I was roadkill. In that place, I heard a voice that said, "Pray to God." I literally heard a voice say, "Pray to God." I don't know who said that. I don't know where it came from. It kind of felt like it was like here, coming out of my chest. And I thought, what a stupid idea. I don't believe in God. I don't pray. And the voice said, "Pray to God." And I thought, I don't know how to pray. I haven't prayed since I was a kid. You know, it's like, I don't pray. I'm not a prayer. Forget it. The voice said, "Pray to God," real strong. And I thought, okay, what would it look like for me to pray? And so I'm thinking, okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Oh, no. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth in this continent a new nation. No. Oh, man, I can't think, I'm remembering things I've memorized because, of course, from my perspective, 38-year-old genius, college professor, department head, I thought prayer was something you memorized when you were a child. So I'm trying to remember, and I finally come up with the Lord is my shepherd. And I'm so excited, I murmured it. I murmured it out of excitement that I actually remembered something that sounded like a prayer. And upon doing that, the people that were still around me, which they were no longer interacting with me because I had become tedious and uninteresting. They became very angry. And they said to me in language that's the worst language I've ever heard in my life, "There is no God, nobody can hear you, and now we're going to really, really hurt you." Basically telling me what we did before was nothing compared to what we're going to do to you now. Because they couldn't bear my most miserable, pathetic little prayer. And then I thought of some other things, like "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And I was only remembering phrases. I couldn't remember a whole verse. I'm saying this stuff, and it's really making them angry. And the thing that I liked was all this time I'd been defenseless, is no matter how hard I had fought to fend them off me, finally I find something they really don't like. And the other thing that I noticed, that the more I said these things, and I was shouting them in anger. The more I said these things, the more it drove them away. And I could we're in pitch black, so I can't see anything, but I can hear them retreating and retreating and retreating. So yippee skippy. I'm really making them mad, and I'm driving them away. So I'm letting them have it with this stuff, and I'm just repeating this stuff over and over again. And eventually I realized the only thing I can hear anymore is me, and I can't hear them. So I become quiet, and I listen carefully. And I know some place, somewhere they're out there, but I don't know where, but they're far. And that's good. And then I think about my situation and realize I'm stuck, because I can't crawl, I can't move, I can't go anywhere, and I don't know where I am. I didn't have to debate this. I knew that I was not alive, and I was not in the world. Where I grew up in Massachusetts, we had septic systems and cesspools. So what I came up with is that I had gone down the toilet and through the plumbing into the cesspool. And I don't know how into cesspool theology you are, but there's layers in the cesspool. At the top is floating the unprocessed stuff, and the deeper you go, the more it gets processed, and then it all becomes liquefied and eventually then goes out into the leaching bed. That's what I was trying to think of, what part of the septic system I was in. I knew that my life was filth, garbage. I knew that I was a selfish ass. I knew that. In the world, I never would have admitted that to you. If you'd met me as Howard Storm, Professor Howard Storm, at Northern University, get you to admire me and be a fan, You know, all you would be to me is someone to support my ego. I did my own life review, and what I concluded was that, I know this sounds funny, but I graded myself after I went through my life, and I realized that I was basically F and D's in every department. My relationship with my father, my mother, my sisters, my students, my friends, my wife, my kids. I just gave myself F and D's up and down the line, because all I could see was all the ways that I had failed. And I felt real bad. I realized that I belonged in the place that I was, and that I was stuck there, and nothing was ever going to change it, and that the only way that I could have any kind of an existence in that place was to somehow pull myself together and to become more vicious than they were. In other words, before you got a chance to bite me in the neck, I'll rip your head off. That would be our greeting. You know, you go for my neck and I rip your head off. And I thought, I'd rather not exist than live like that, because I'd rather not be than be one of them. So now I'm in a dilemma, because here I am, there's no way out. I have no way of knowing how, yet they're going to come back, and I can't count on this prayer bit, which was quite insincere. You know, I mean, it wasn't from my heart. It was just like, it worked. It was, but I mean, how long is that going to work for me, you know? And I went into the deepest despair. I mean, here I am in the cesspool, and now I'm emotionally, spiritually sinking into a deeper hole. My little mind's working, trying to come up with something. It comes up with like a 8 or 9 year old child sitting in Sunday school singing "Jesus Loves Me." It wasn't the idea. The words were good, but it wasn't the words. It was like, when I was a little kid, I believed in like this God/Superman. And when, you know, the alligators and bears that live under your bed that are trying to bite your toes, remember them? When they would start snapping at my toes at night, you know, in the middle of the night, I would pray to Jesus and they would go away. And then of course I'm having voices in my head saying, you don't believe this silly stuff, you know, like that, you know, you were a child, you're an idiot. You know it's not true. And then the other voices were saying, why would he care about you? You've done nothing but use his name as a cuss word for the past 20 years, you know, like, you know, he's not going to listen to you. Even if he did exist, he hates your guts. You know, I mean, I'm having all this stuff going on. And then, like, finally, I'm like screaming in my head, like, stop it, stop it, stop it. And I just yell out into the darkness, pure desperation, Jesus, please save me. Without the faintest idea whether there was a Jesus or not a Jesus, or whether he liked me or didn't like me, or, you know, I mean, I had nothing except this faint hope that it might be true. This impossibly bright light, like if it was actually light, it would have burned me. I was like, you know, so overwhelmed by the brightness of the light and its beauty. And then, like, I looked down at myself and I saw gore, and I was like, ew, I had been eviscerated. Okay. Not pretty. And out of this light came hands and arms, and he touched me. And when he touched me, 3 things happened. One is all the gore just started to disappear and I became whole. The other thing that happened was I was filled with ecstasy instead of being simply just nothing but pain from head to foot. Now all of a sudden that the pain goes away and I'm filled with ecstasy. And lastly, and most importantly, I experienced a love that I had never known that existed. And unfortunately, I haven't found any language yet that can begin to describe it. He picked me up. He held me real tight. When he held me, I knew that there was some, besides all this healing and love and all that, that he really, really liked me a lot. Matter of fact, I'm his favorite person in the whole universe. I have to add, unfortunately, you are too. And he likes me. I mean, he doesn't dislike me. He's not, you know, he's not mad at me. You know, he's happy. So I'm holding on to Jesus. I'm crying, happy cry. And he's rubbing my back. He gave me a nice, very soft, tender back rub. And we take off. just like flying in a helicopter, except it was just Jesus and me without the helicopter. All I'm aware of, because like I've got my face buried in his chest and neck, was we're going. We're really going. And actually, I'm a little bit scared because I'm actually thinking, so I hope he doesn't let go of me. So we're moving, and I'm trying to get my act together because I'm feeling, I've put a lot of slobber on him from my nose and mouth, a lot of slobber. And I'm feeling bad about that because I don't have a hanky to clean him up. And okay, so I'm trying to get together. So I get enough together, and I look and I see like we're moving towards a world of light, and all around the world of light, like a bazillion little lights going in and coming out, and there's all this activity. And I had this gigantic, the God that I said wasn't, we're going to his house. We're going into his territory. I mean, I know that. I just know that somewhere in that big galaxy of light, if you will, there's God in that, and we're headed towards it, and I am the biggest idiot in the whole world. And they probably hate me, because of what I've said and done. I think to myself, he's made a terrible mistake. I don't belong here. And with that, we come to a stop, and we are outside of the world of light, which we could call heaven, because that's what it was. I call it home. He spoke to me for the first time telepathically, and he said, we don't make mistakes. You belong here. And I thought, how do you know what I thought? I didn't say that. Can you hear what I think? And he laughed and he said, I know everything you've ever thought. And I thought, I feel real uncomfortable with you knowing everything I've ever thought, because I've thought things that I don't want you to know that I've thought. And immediately I thought of something that I didn't want him to know that I thought about, which is I thought of a breast. I've always been a boob guy. And you know what he did? He laughed and laughed and laughed. He thought it was really funny. And I thought, oh, he thinks I'm funny. He said, yeah, you're real funny. And I was like, he thinks I'm funny because nobody thinks I'm funny. I mean, like, I have a wicked sense of humor, but it's like, it's New England. It's very dry. I make like a lot of jokes, and people look at me like, what's your problem? So, like, we started talking, and he kind of interrupted our conversation, which is all telepathically. He had a young male voice. He said, I got a bunch of people I want you to meet. And so he called out with tone, musical tone. And they came, and there was a group of them, and they formed a semicircle around us. And he said, they've recorded your life, and they want to show you your life. So we proceeded to watch my life, and that was what I would refer to as a holographic projection of me interacting with people. And the interesting thing was that there were props, but usually not a background, only when the background was appropriate. We got tables and chairs and a floor, and the rest just isn't there at all. We'd go into a scene and like see what happened to the person after, what happened to them after we'd interacted, or what they were feeling. We'd feel what they were feeling. I was more manipulative and detached from people, and Jesus and the angels clearly shared their unhappiness with the direction that I was going. Not in a cruel way, just like, it's really disappointing. And I felt their feelings, and I felt bad that I was such a disappointment. They weren't angry, they weren't mad, they were just disappointed. What I ultimately learned from the whole thing was that we were created to love one another. That's our job, that's the curriculum, that's the whole thing in a nutshell, and that's the only thing that matters. And what I was doing was moving away from that. I mean, I had a career, I had a wife, I had kids, I had a house, I had cars, blah, blah, blah. I had all that. I had the American dream, and I was going somewhere, and I won prizes at art shows, and I got tenure, and I was a full professor, and I, blah, blah, blah. And none of that mattered. And they let me know that none of that mattered at all. Matter of fact, it was very surprising disappointment, because I'd say, look here. I got, I'm a full professor. I'm 26 years old, full professor. Nobody gets that, I'm like, yeah, well, that is of no consequence at all. Look here where you ignored a student who really, really needed a friend. And then they would feel so sad for that student, and it's good. And as the life review went on into my adult life, I was begging them to stop it. I'm like, I got it. Enough. No. And they'd say, no, you got to watch it. So we went through the whole thing. It was brutal, and I made them very disappointed and very sad. But I got the point. It was real simple. We were here. We were supposed to love each other, and I completely missed it. I thought my life was about being the most famous, wealthiest, important, powerful person that I could possibly be. I mean, I wanted it all. When we were over with that whole thing, he said, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah, I got a million questions. So I asked him everything I could think of to answer. And he answered everything. I've never told anybody everything because some of it gets like a little esoteric. And, I've gotten in trouble for stuff. I mean, I've had people tell me that I'm the devil and I'm an apostasy, and I've been accused of things just like real simple stuff. Like, for example, I'll give you an example of like when babies are either aborted or stillborn or die when they're very young, they just get another chance at life. And people have been furious with me and called me all kinds of names because Jesus told me that. And it's like, I'm sorry if you don't like Jesus' plan. No, he doesn't throw babies into hell. He not only told me, but he showed me, and we visited some places that the universe is full of intelligent beings and varied life forms. And that, in fact, this world is one of the lowest of them all. There's a lot more spiritual, kind, good, loving, and intelligent beings all over the universe. I asked Jesus, and so what happens to people when they die? And he said, it's a really big problem because he said, usually when people die, they don't know they've died because like when they were dying, they were in suffering. And when they die, the suffering's over. And so they feel really good. So they think they've gotten well and they don't know that they've died at all. It's funny because people are terrified of dying. It's like, no, dying's really great when you're not doing well, Ran out of stuff to say. So I said, okay, I want to go to heaven. And he's like, actually, you got to go back to the world and try and, have the life that you were created to be in the first place. So we had a huge argument. People always say, like, argument. I go, yeah, I argued with him as much as I could possibly argue. I said, why would you send me back to the world? Because it's full of cruel, mean people, and it's just terrible existence down there. And he said, that's true. There's lots of cruel, mean people. And he said, there's also very loving, beautiful people. And he said, what's in your heart is what you'll find. And if you have love in your heart, you will see the love in other people. If you have beauty in other people, you'll see the beauty in them. He said, it's what's in you is what you're going to find. And you know what? Amazingly, he was right again. I've been doing this thing for over 30 years 33 years now, since 85. And yeah, if you seek love and beauty, you find love and beauty. If you seek cruelty and ugliness, you find cruelty and ugliness. But I'm telling you, the love and the beauty is in everywhere and in everyone, including people that do not strike you immediately as either loving or beautiful. When I was recovering in what they called the recovery area of the hospital in Paris, the room was kind of dark. It was daytime, but the lights weren't on. The room lit up. And this young man, beautiful young man, in his like mid or late 20s, it appeared, blonde, wearing hospital scrubs, pale green scrubs with a V-neck, short sleeves, and sneakers. He comes into the room and he goes, Howard, how are you? I'm like, whoa. Once again, perfect English. No, kind of a surprise in a French hospital. Long and short of it was, he said, I'm going to be watching over you, and I want to assure you that everything's going to be okay, but you've got a long recovery ahead of you. But I will always be around. And I said, great. I mean, he was so kind. And I said, so what's your name? And he said, don't worry about that. He said, you will never see me again. And I said, you just said you're going to watch over me and you're going to see me through this whole recovery, and you'd always be around, and now you're telling me I'm never going to see you again. He said, yes, that's all true. He said, I'll be around, but you'll never see me again. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. You know, are you going to be with me? He said, I will be with you. Always know I will be with you. And I said, no, I will never see you again. He said, you'll never see me again. And I said, very, very confusing. I don't understand. He said, now I have to go. So he left. The room went, when he left the room went back down to drab. And I'm sitting there like, what was that? You know, what was that all about? Crazy. Immediately, the nurse comes into the room. And I said, what was the name of the doctor that was just here? And she said, there was nobody here. And I said, no, he, like the young doctor with the blonde hair and, you know, and the sneakers and stuff, you know. And she said, there was nobody in the room. And I said, there was someone just in the room. He just left. You probably passed him coming in. And she said, my desk is right outside this door. I have been sitting at that desk for a long time. Nobody has been in this room or out of this room. And I said, no, you don't understand. There was this beautiful young man who was just here visiting me. She said, no one has been in this room. I have been right here by the door. Nobody has come into the room. And I said, well, you're wrong. And I got really upset. She got mad at me because I was arguing with her. I mean, her English wasn't that good, and I spoke very poor French. But anyways, we were having this argument. She's like, she just gave up on me. The thing that drives me crazy is that it's so simple, it's so easy to call out to God and have your life totally changed. And you can go from despair to joy. You can go from pain to bliss. You can find, like, all your problems aren't going to be solved immediately, but with the help of God, you will find the solutions to your problems. You know, you find a way through all the difficulties of life, and find a community of support through faith communities. It's like, and the thing is that in real churches, real synagogues, real temples, it's all free, no cost, no obligation. I mean, because you get a bunch of people just living to try and be helpful and supportive to someone.
My friends, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. My buddy here, Jason Gordon, just tagged me in a video. I caught wind on my way home about some signs like this that were up in my hometown. So my buddy asked me if I wanted to come over and go with him to go fucking talk about it. So I did. I went and knocked on the neighbor's door. They said that the upstairs tenant wasn't home. He was down at Cumberland Farms. So we took a ride down to Cumberland Farms. On the way home, I saw the so-called tenant sitting on a park bench right across from Norway Savings Bank. So I had my buddy here pull over, drop me off, and I stopped and talked to him for a minute. As it turns out, he's an old veteran. Apparently he served in Vietnam, and he was from the 101st Airborne, which is the same division that I served in. So I tried to talk some sense into him. We walked the whole way home, which is probably only about a quarter of a mile, but he's an old man with a cane, so it took a minute. I tried to tell him that his ways were wrong. I tried to tell him that these fucking signs right here were wrong. He got a little hostile as we entered his apartment, held up his cane, tried to tell us that any good black man is a dead man. Well, I don't fucking agree with that shit. You understand? No good man is a dead man, okay? We're not gonna tolerate this shit around here. I got better things to do with my time. We're both working men. We both own fucking businesses, okay? We took time out of our personal schedule to come and address your fucking ass about signs like this, okay? I can tell you right now, I'm not the toughest guy in town, but you hang up a fucking sign like this in my town, and I'm gonna knock on your door, okay? Don't be a fucking dick. Understand in your brain that shit ain't the way it used to be. Shit's changed, and you have to adapt to your new fucking situations. But this, I won't tolerate. I don't care who you are. You could be a friend, or you could be fucking a 70-year-old veteran like fucking Richard. It don't matter.
Don't be a dick.
Wake the fuck up. Don't be a dick.